So now we're at the carburetor. We're ready to remove it, but first we need to disconnect some things from the carburetor. We're going to be pulling this linkage off here with the two cables plugged into it. We're going to be removing the fuel inlet and the vacuum line, as well as this cable here, which is your auto enricher cable. If you notice, it's not a zip tie, it's a handy dandy little quick release. We're going to pull that off to free up all these wires, and I'm actually going to hook this back on right here so I don't lose it. And what we can do is get the clip out of the way here from the air intake. And now there's two screws on the front of this that I'm going to want to remove to get this linkage off. Then we should be able to get the cable off of the linkage. It's in the way, but this is a lot easier than having to disconnect both of these cables since they're both kind of fighting each other. If you pull on one to give it slack, it's going to tighten the other. So this should make it far easier for us to just get this little assembly linkage right out of the way here. Little slit in the linkage to allow the cable to fall out. We're going to do that top and bottom. And now we have our cables out of the way. At this point, we're going to disconnect our auto enricher. Our vacuum line normally just pulls right up and off. I'm not going to remove the fuel line yet. What I'm going to do is unhook the carburetor and lift the whole thing up and get the fuel line higher than the tank. That way, gravity can't work negatively for us. At this point, I want to remove the air box, but a lot of these air intake manifolds are really, really hard from, just being old. The rubber does get hard. So I'm going to try to pry it off without breaking anything. Should be able to. All right, I'm going to go a different direction. I'm actually going to disconnect the carburetor from the actual intake manifold, not the intake boot. I'm going to remove it from the intake manifold. I've already gone and removed the two mounting screws to the air box itself. So I'm going to be able to take the carburetor and the air box off as one. Now, the carburetor is disconnected from the engine. Oh, I lied to you earlier. See what my fingers are on? That's the oil line from the oil pump. We're going to want to remove that as well. There we go. Oh, wow. That old, huh? It actually pulled the fitting right out of the carburetor. That's funny. Carburetor. We just pulled that out. I'll probably just end up snipping that line down, centimeter if that, so I get a fresh connection onto that. Let's continue. So now we should be able to, in a more easy fashion, maybe I'm lying to you. Alright, I'm going to pause the video and get this off of here without wasting your time. Alright, I'm back. Got it off. Now the last thing to do is to remove this fuel line. Pull that up and off. Some people don't realize this, but in the Zuma carburetor, there is a fuel filter in the fuel inlet. So that's the carburetor's fuel filter. We're not going to need that. There is a new one in the new carburetor. Alright, let's take a look at these carburetors. Look at the slide area size in there in the stock carburetor compared to the new carburetor. A little bigger. But I got to admit, I pulled a rookie move. After moving this carburetor around so much and pulling this black cap on and off so many times, I've actually lost the inline filter. I am not reusing this old one. In lieu of a fuel filter, I'm going to be installing an inline Helix blue fuel filter. I'm going to pop that little bugger in right here so we actually have some kind of fuel filtration before we ruin this carburetor. On fuel filters, they all have a direction of flow, and on this one on the inside you can see it says flow in that direction. So what I want to do, you know, size it up real quick. Got your fuel filter going to come down, like fuel line going to come down into the carburetor here. So if I cut it right around in here, I should be able to just pop this thing right in line. Let me snip that real quick. Get that off of there. It's the right size. I thought maybe I goofed up again, but hey. Measure once, cut twice, always. Just kidding. Oh, almost pulled another rookie move. I want to put my cable anchors on there. Alright, so after fighting with all these fuel lines, I finally got them all on there. It's one of my least favorite jobs to do is fuel lines, believe it or not, because you gotta wrestle. Anyway, now we're gonna pop this guy on. First thing I'm gonna do is push this fuel line down onto this carburetor without the filter in there, because I have one right here in line. Here we go. Fuel line's on. We're gonna get vacuum line on. And then this little cap. Your fuel bowl breather is actually covered by the auto enricher's cap. So when you slide that down on there, now it's not gonna splash out or get any crud down in through it. This little guy, we're just gonna cap and block off. We're not gonna be using that for anything. Got our oil coming in here. Go ahead and plug this baby into the intake. Okay, plug this in. Before I hook the throttle cables up, I'm gonna go grab another piece of fuel line so I can block this extra port that's right here. Another difference with these new carburetors, where this guy comes out at that I'm gonna be plugging, that's where the old mixture screw was. The mixture screw on the new carburetors is behind this little rubber boot. You can pry that out with a pick, you know, something small, and then that's gonna be your air screw. Instead of on a standard carburetor, it would be here. So we are going to block that off. That's for like a charcoal canister. You know, keep the fumes down, the smell down. We don't have any of that, so we'll just block it. Easiest way to block vacuums. I take a bolt that fits into a fuel line or vacuum line, very snug. Snug enough to where you can actually spin it in. Now this little guy, I'm gonna have to get a hose clamp to clamp that on there, but for now, I'm gonna leave it just like that. Alright, so before I go any further, I want to put some new hose clamps on all these. I was just gonna temporarily hook everything up, but instead of going back over my tracks like I'm gonna do now again, let's just go ahead and pop some of these guys on all the hose ends, just to make sure everything's got a good tight seal to everything, alright? I'm mainly doing this because when I block off the vacuum, I'm going to be using this, and this end just fits too loose over the carburetor. So I'm actually going to take one of these little buggers, I'm going to tighten it down a little bit to get this vacuum to block off that little guy tightly. I'm going to then go here and there. Oh, and there. Alright, so I got it on the fuel inlet and the vacuum line. But the vacuum line was just a little too small, so I had to make the hose clamp smaller, and I'm going to show you a little trick. Same with my vacuum line. Now if you look, my vacuum line is just loose fitting. So if I try to put that down on, it's not going to grab. So what I did with the other one, take a wrench and grab the one side hook, take another wrench, and then turn and pinch down. What you're doing is making this hole smaller. Now don't worry really about getting a wrench around to pinch it open. The little trick I do is I make sure that this thing is really snug going in, almost too tight. So then when you push it down over the little fitting on the carburetor, you know it's going to hold in place. If you see how tight this is in there, this thing is not, it's not moving. So now I'm going to take this and press it onto here. Oh, and I can feel it click right on. Like, that's got a way better seal than I had previously. So now we have everything hooked up. In 1 second I'll have the oil hooked up. And this oil fitting is that oil line has a barb on the fitting to the carburetor, so now it's going to be a pain to get off. Carburetor is hooked up. I'm going to lock it down here and then install the air box. Never over tighten these. You can cut the rubber on the boot. And I always try to spin the carburetor to see how tight it is. Alright, that's good and tight. Now this dreadful air box connection is going to go on. Let's see if I can do this easier than before, huh? Cool, air box is on. I'm not going to worry about this clip yet because I want to have the room to get my my fittings on here. Throttle linkage is tight. Looks to work for me. All right. Cool. Carburetor is now hooked up. Oh. Alright guys, so now that we have the carburetor hooked up, brand new carburetor is all installed, it's getting fuel, everything sealed off that needs to be sealed off, we got everything tight. Alright guys, little update on the Zuma. I came into work, 2 days ago, and there was an overflow from the carburetor. There was a little bit of gas leaking down the engine, all the way down onto the lift here. So I cleaned all that up, and I figured, hey, why not check the petcock to make sure that this thing's working? It's vacuum operated from the carburetor, like normal. Here's my fuel outlet. And no matter, like, you can see a little bit of gas coming out right there? That's all I get. No matter how hard of a vacuum I give this, or if I blow in it. Watch the filter. Nothing. There's gas in the tank, but nothing is coming out of here when I suck on this or if I blow on this. Same thing with this. I can suck or blow, which is freaking disgusting, but it doesn't pull any fuel or push any fuel. I get a trickle. What's going on? 2 days ago I get an overflow, and now today I can't get any fuel. So my next step is to remove this petcock and inspect that. I'm going to have to drain the gas to do so. Let's see what happens.